Moving on from the very good, we have the great. This is the second to last tier and will cover 20 through 11, making it so the next video will be the final one and will be my top 10. Starting from here, fights stop really having any major flaws. They are rated on a combination of how good and how fun they are. I also want to highlight and explain my thought process and how I wrote about these bosses. Like with the tiers before, there is a big focus on the negative of these fights. This is simply because all of these fights are of such high quality that it's much easier to differentiate them on what they're doing poorly rather than what they're doing well. All of these bosses have fantastic movesets, making it so that there isn't much to say about their individual moves, unless they deviate from the norm and there are issues with them. I find this to be a more efficient and clear way to get across my thoughts on why one boss is ranked higher than another. But I want to make it clear that as a baseline, all of these bosses are fantastic, so don't confuse me criticizing these fights with me complaining or not liking them. I'll try to highlight whatever I think they do exceptionally well, but it will mostly be about flaws. Okay, with the disclaimer out of the way, let's get into the actual list.
I command thee, kneel! I am the Lord of all that is golden.
To start off the tier, we have what I would consider to be the best early game boss FromSoft has made so far. Godrick is a pretty fantastic fight. Never have they really managed to make an early game boss feel as complex and memorable even when compared to mid to late game bosses, while still managing to scale him to the early game where you meet him. On the topic of his gameplay, I didn't really find that much to talk about. All of his attacks are good and they do a good job of preparing you for the rest of the game, but not really feel like a tutorial boss at all. He's a nice mix of moves they have to deal with in different ways. He has his wind toss move they have to dodge in a specific direction, and he has his ground slam they either have to run away from or take the risk and jump in for more damage. Godrick also does the thing that a lot of good bosses do, where he has two phases, with the second phase just being a powered up version of his first phase with some added moves. Godrick is one of the better bosses that does this. He stays somewhat the same while being different enough to be refreshing to fight. He doesn't get too many new moves so you won't feel overwhelmed after the change, and the ones he does get are different enough from his base that he doesn't feel the exact same. Much like the area you find him in, he feels pretty perfectly balanced to your level when you fight him. He's the first proper hard fight that most people will meet, doing a good job of feeling hard, but not overwhelmingly so. If Elden Ring is your first FromSoft game, he will give you the same feeling as Gascoigne or even Genichiro, the dopamine rush of clearing a hard challenger that will most likely get you hooked until you clear the rest of the game. Artorias is a pretty good example of what I was talking about earlier. Despite being one of my favorite fights in the entire series, I don't feel like I have that much to say about it. Artorias is such a banger of a fight. I think my notes summed it up perfectly. Good gameplay, good lore, good visuals, good music. There is one thing I think Artorias does especially well, and that is his lore. This includes before, after, and even before the fight itself. It's quite obvious that Artorias is one of the favorites for the devs. He has a bunch of lore, a lot of characters are directly tied to him, and they speak both frequently and highly of him. Even after all of this build up, his fight does not disappoint. Gameplay wise, there aren't really much to say. Like all other bosses this high up, his attacks are all good and the fight has a fantastic flow. What this fight does really well is the storytelling it does. You really get a feel for his fall and how he has been corrupted by the Abyss. He's aggressive and pretty much just throws himself at you. Most likely because he can sense the Abyss or Manus from you as you have the pendant. This makes perfect sense as the one thing he hates is the Abyss. Even after being consumed by it, it is his only goal to obliterate it. Another great detail is his broken arm. The animation does a fantastic job of conveying this with his movements and his attacks. Most likely being broken as he was defending Sif, it further adds to the tragedy of his character. It also adds even more reason as to why his style is so aggressive. As it was mentioned earlier in the game, Artorias originally used a sword and a shield, but with his shield arm broken, he has no choice but to go all out on the offensive. Honestly, one of the only faults I have with this fight is that it's quite old now and therefore simply is not as fleshed out as later fights in the series. But honestly, I choose to see it as more of a positive that he managed to climb this high despite being a simpler fight than most of the other ones this high up. And Artorias is just a fantastic fight, easily one of my favorites in the entire series. He does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to good fights in the original game. Though that being said, he isn't quite what I would call the best fight. That honor goes to... This might be a controversial one, as I assume Artorias is most people's favorite fight in Dark Souls 1. And believe me, it was really hard deciding between these two. But in the end, I feel like Manus inches ahead ever so slightly by the fact that he has a more complex fight. Manus is honestly a rare one, as not only is he a fairly large boss, but he also has one of the best mixes of physical and magic attacks in the entire series. His physical attacks are done well, with all of them being distinct and easy to read, not falling into the same trap as many other big bosses where it can be hard to distinguish between their attacks. On top of this, he also has a fair amount of magic moves, which are for the most part good. There are situations where they get really poor RNG and he can spam spells one after another, but even then there is an item in the game that can help you out if you choose to use it. Though in my own experience I've never needed to use it, as he uses his magic fairly sparingly, and all his attacks are dodgeable with good movements and well timed rolls. If I had to say something about his moveset that I don't like, it's that occasionally when you're close to him and he does his jumping attack, he'll hit you with his feet as he starts the attack. This will stagger you and making so you tank the full hit no matter what. I don't think this was something that was intended, and it's more of a result of you being inside his hitbox as he does the attack, and to be honest, it doesn't happen all that often, so I don't really mind it that much. Manus was also one of the first fights in the entire series to actually have a combo, and honestly, it still holds up really well. His combo is a pretty long one, and he will lock into the entire thing once you get hit, the saving grace being that he has a pretty massive tail for it, so realistically you shouldn't really ever get hit by it. I much prefer this style of combo attacks to the ones that they're doing currently. With Manus, it's an attack that he uses sparingly and is easy to dodge, but is devastating if you mess up and get hit by it. With the current combo moves, it's quite the opposite. Bosses will constantly be launching into long combos with up to double-digit amounts of hit, forcing you to either be spam rolling or just stand far away waiting for it to end. I hope with whatever game they decide to do next, they look more to Manus and Bloodborne for inspiration rather than Elden Ring. Much like Artorias, Manus also has a pretty fantastic build-up when it comes to his lore. As the father of the Abyss, there's a plethora of lore about this guy, with almost all of it being accessible before you fight him. Even if you aren't a big fan of reading item descriptions, just talking to NPCs in the DLC and Dusk in the main game, you'll get a pretty good idea about Manus. To add even further to this, Manus has one of the most unique and interesting designs in the entire game. Nothing really looks or fights quite like Manus, making him a memorable boss in the series filled with fantastic bosses. Just like with Artorias, I honestly just wish I could rate him higher, but with the restriction of being one of their older games, this is about as high as I feel I can realistically place him. But hey, it's a pretty respectable ranking if you ask me. As a concept, Solo of Cinder is one of the best in the entire series, both in gameplay and lore. It was honestly a genius idea to cap off the series, excluding the DLC, with a boss that is the amalgamation of every single person that has linked the fire before you. Making it so the boss has several different styles that he will switch between was a pretty clever use of gameplay mechanics for storytelling. It also makes for a pretty fantastic fight gameplay wise, as there aren't really all that many other bosses in the series that completely changes their moveset mid-fight. The balancing between each form is done pretty well, making it so that it's mostly up to the individual player what fighting stance they're good or bad against. Another big plus is that even if you manage to beat him in your first try, you will most likely get to see all, or at least most of his forms, as he swaps fairly often. Great for both letting you see them all, but also good for keeping you on your toes and not letting the fight get stale. And like that wasn't good enough, once you hit phase 2, man, phase 2 actually gave me goosebumps. Once you get into phase 2, he will once again change his fighting style to one you haven't seen yet, or at least not in this game you haven't. And just as you start to figure out, the piano hits. The pling pling plong. Man, it's honestly hard to describe just how well this worked on me. The simultaneous realization that you're fighting Gwyn and his theme starting to play hit like a truck. I genuinely did get goosebumps. Usually I'm not really one to care much for music in games, like you've probably noticed from me barely mentioning it up until this point, despite FromSoft having some of the best music in gaming. But man, I just can't get over how brilliant this moment was. Though obviously, it's not just this, even his moveset's fantastic, managing to keep the identity of Gwyn while still being able to update him enough to make him fit with the faster combat of Dark Souls 3. They fixed a few problems I had with Gwyn in Dark Souls 1, while adding more to him to make him an even better fight. This being said, he does have some problems. Despite the series being known for fantastic hitboxes, Soul of Cinder can be a bit wonky. He suffers from one of the same problems as Ivory King, where it's hard to tell what his actual range is at times. Some of his attacks have a tendency to hit you during rolls. This leaves me feeling not as refined as most of the other bosses in the game. As a final boss, I think Solo Cinder might be the very best I've ever fought. It's such a powerful ending to the series, excluding DLC, with no real flaws. You might think it's a bit weird for me to say this, as he isn't even in my final tier, and you're right, it is honestly a bit weird. The reason why I rate him this low on the list, while still thinking he's one of the best, is simply because as a Souls fight, he can be a bit lacking. I understand that they don't want to make him too difficult, as everyone will have a chance to beat him, and this hurts him overall as a Souls fight. While he is an interesting concept as a fight, he is also fairly easy. I feel as though most people will probably clear this fight within 1 to 3 tries. This is fine from the point of view of storytelling, but leaves him feeling a bit lackluster from a mechanical perspective. If he was made to be as hard as, say, Melania or Freed, then he could easily be in my top 5. But I am glad that they made him the way he is. Really focusing on the storytelling aspect instead of the gameplay was a good idea, and paid off in the end. I think it'll be a very long time until FromSoft manages to top this as a final boss.
Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
This is specifically referring to his second and last fight, as I won't be rating his first in the series. As you've probably noticed already, with the exception of Margit, I wouldn't really be including teaser fights like the first Mohg in this list. With that out of the way, let's actually get talking about the fight, though honestly, even though most of this is scripted, I'm not even sure what to say about Mohg. Even when I was fighting him, I didn't really think Mohg was anything special. His moveset is good with no big flaws, he even has a good mix between physical and magic attack. It's just, overall he feels a bit lackluster, like there isn't anything special about his fight that gets me really interested. I think this comes from a combination of things in the fight and outside the fight. Like I said, his fight is good, but there isn't really anything special that I noticed and latched onto. The same thing can honestly be said about his presentation and lore. Design-wise, I find Mohg to be a bit boring. He is a big dude, making him quite intimidating, helped even more by his demonic design, but overall he ends up feeling a bit generic. This feeling also carries on when it comes to his lore. There isn't really all that much about Mohg. A lot of his story and lore is just kind of unknown currently. This ends up being a shame, as Mikla is in this arena, one of the most interesting lore characters in the entire game, but the way he is used is a waste. He's kind of just there. Obviously this might and probably will get expanded upon when the DLC comes out, and all of this will just age horribly, but as things currently stand, I just feel like it's a waste. There's also the whole Omen part, but even here I think he's just outclassed by his brother, who goes much more in depth exploring the themes central to the Omen. It is a shame, as obviously shown by his rating, I do still think fairly highly of his fight, but a lot of this comes from him being one of the harder bosses in the game. Not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but I do also have problems with the actual gameplay part of his fight. This mostly comes down to the transition to his second phase. The game straight up does a piss poor job at explaining what is even happening here. There isn't really any indication that there's anything you can do about the life drain that happens here. I know that FromSoft loves to leave stuff like this ambiguous, but it just doesn't work in this example. This is made even worse by the fact they had the perfect item in the game already they could have used. The way you counter is by having a specific tier in your flask, a tier you picked up significantly earlier in the game and is very easy to miss. There is also another item that counters him that is way harder to miss, and has a lot more build up throughout the game, that being his shackles. Just like his brother, Mohg also has shackles that can be found in the overworld, and then used against him in the fight to stun him for a brief time, where you can do a lot of damage to them. This is a reinforced mechanic, as you can use it against Margit, Morgoth, and the first iteration of Mohg, all before you fight the final Mohg. They literally had the perfect item to use as a mechanic to counter this transition. And yet, they decided to make it some arbitrary item hidden inside another mechanic. Don't get me wrong, I actually quite like this mechanic on paper. If it had been countered by the shackles, I'd probably be raving about it in this section instead. But alas, I feel as though FromSoft really blundered here. But still, overall, I think Mohg is a fun fight. Just like his brother, Mohg is challenging but fair, with a varied moveset that never really feels boring to play against, even if you have technically fought them both before. With a varied moveset that never really feels boring to play against, even if you have technically fought them before. I do think the addition of outside items was poorly done in this case, but it's not so bad that I'm really dropping it all that many slots on the list. You can just look it up online after all. My only wish is that the fight felt more unique. As it stands, it's an unfortunately forgettable fight, even if it is a good one.
Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt.
Gehrman is what I would consider to be the best duel type fight in the entire series. While there are several other fights in the list that are higher, and are also one-on-one fights, none of them quite fit in the duel theme as much as Gehrman does. Most of these other fights will have things added to them, such as magic or other such powers. Meanwhile, Gehrman doesn't really have anything like this. He does have a power-up in phase 2, but other than doing an initial AoE damage around him, it doesn't add anything magical to the fight. He basically just pops a Beast Blood pellet and hits harder. Also, unlike other fights, he will actually stagger easily, just like the player does. All of this culminates in what I would call a duel, a fair fight between two opponents on an even playing field. If anything, it's the player that has the advantage when it comes to this fight. Being a duel works perfectly for this fight, both in terms of lore and combat. I wouldn't really be going into the lore as it would just take way too long, as I would have to explain a lot of Bloodrun lore, so let me explain the gameplay side at least. Throughout the game, you have several fights against other hunters. For most of these, there will always be some other element that stops it from being a straight up duel, like the blood/fire magic with Maria and the second phase of Gascoigne. But there is none of this with Gehrman. He is a pure 1v1 all the way through. Even though I literally just critiqued Mohg for not having a WoW factor in his kit, I'm about to praise Gehrman for doing that exact thing. I think it was a pretty brave decision to leave Gehrman as plain as he is, but I think it was well worth it. Gehrman is basic, his movements are fairly limited. Aside from a few lunging attacks and jumps, he doesn't really move all that much different from the player. All of these aspects compound together and build upon one another to create a perfect hunter fight. I do have one complaint with the fight, and even this I'm not quite sure of myself, but I do think the fight is a bit too easy. On one hand, I do like the fact that he is somewhat weak, as it makes sense as Gehrman is old as shit and well past his prime. But on the other hand, I would have loved to fight Gehrman in his prime, in a proper hard fight that really challenges me. Basically, from a storytelling perspective, I think this was a good decision, but I can't help being greedy and wanting it to be a harder fight, like what they did with Kos. Still, I'm happy that I got at least one proper hunter fight in the game, and what a banger it was.
You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
The Twin Princes is one of the last fights on the list that aren't simply a 1v1 against another humanoid enemy, and probably one of the fights in the entire series that executes their niche the best. I wish that FromSoft would focus more of their energy on fights like this, as they're fairly rare. While the princes are technically humanoid enemies, the fight is done in such a way that it's wholly unique. Personally, I think this is a very impressive fight, as not only does it manage to be mechanically impressive, but it is also fantastic in a storytelling sense. And I don't only mean this in their dialogue, but through their attacks as well. Like interactions between the brothers during the fight, as Lothric enhances Lorien's attacks, or Lorien acting as Lothric's legs despite not actually having any himself. Like with the bosses before, I won't be getting into any specific lore, but this is definitely another fight that is enhanced by knowing the lore beforehand. It is also a fight where the lore is enhanced by the fight itself. I love when FromSoft does fights like this, where there was obviously a lot of effort and care put into mixing in the lore of the characters into their fight. Though the most impressive part is how they managed to not only weave in the lore, but also make the fight mechanically better while doing so. Twin Princes is another fight where phase 1 is a good fight, and phase 2 expands upon that foundation by enhancing certain attacks and adding complex new ones. The way Twin Princes does this is by having Lothric join the fight in phase 2, making him have his own unique attacks and enhancing some of Lorien's. It might sound simple and obvious, but I genuinely think this was a stroke of genius from the devs, and I don't think FromSoft has quite managed to hit this level of detail in any fight after this one. I sure have done a lot of gushing so far, and I'm not done yet. Not only is the Twin Princes one of the best and unique duo fights in the game, but even if you were to only look at Lorien on his own, I think the fight is quite fantastic. Like every other boss this high up, he has a good moveset, where I don't think any of his moves are particularly problematic. Most of his swings are fairly slow but hard hitting, something that could be seen as bad as with other bosses, but Lorien makes up for this with his unique mechanic. On top of having Lothric join in phase 2, Lorien also has a teleport mechanic, where he'll teleport around the room before or even during certain attacks. Teleporting is a pretty interesting mechanic that is surprisingly not used all that often. Most times where it's used, it's more of a break in the fight, only exceptions being Gale and Placidus Axe, so basing an entire fight around this should have been a no-brainer. This being said, I think they did a pretty good job at it. Lorien uses it fairly often, but not so often that getting attacks in is frustrating. His attacks also mix in the teleport pretty well, even the ones that weren't specifically made for it. The tracking is even fairly competent, as long as Lorien doesn't teleport out of your lock range, but it is fairly rare for the lock to break during a teleport. If I were to have any criticism of the mechanic, it's that I wish it had more of an auditory cue. If they made it so that you could track it purely by sound, I think it would add a lot to the fight, as you wouldn't even need to lock on to know where he is. Added to that, humans react faster to sound than visuals, making it easier for people that are struggling with the fight to react in time. Overall, the Twin Princes is one of my favorite fights in the entire series when looked at as a whole. The only reason why it doesn't rank any higher is mostly because the fights above it are just more complex and therefore more interesting as fights. It might feel a bit cheap to rank it lower despite all of which I've said, but it is a fight tier after all. I'm just glad I got to gush about a fight that I really like. Just like with the previous fight, Radahn is definitely another fight which is greatly enhanced by knowing his lore beforehand. Radahn is a bit easier to know the lore as you get a bit of a lore dump by the announcer and a cutscene just before the fight, though I don't think Radahn expands as much upon this in his actual gameplay. He does have his gravity magic and of course his horrors, but other than that there isn't really much more. The reason why I think his lore makes this fight better is also a reason a lot of people might miss out on by no fault of their own. See, for some reason, FromSoft decided this was going to be a fight that you can not only summon for, but you are heavily incentivized to do so, as you basically have an infinite amount of summons that can more or less solo the fight for you. While I think this mechanic on its own isn't a bad addition, it even has one of my favorite examples of a joke in a Souls game with patches just piecing out of your world after seeing that you're fighting Radahn. I think it's a bit of a shame that they chose Radahn as the fight to do this. Personally, I think it would be better suited for some sort of absolute massive boss where fighting it alone is genuinely a big ask. While I do think Radahn is a fairly hard boss, and he is a bit of a big boy, I don't think he's hard enough to where you need a near infinite amount of summons. A lot of my enjoyment for this fight comes with the feeling of the Warrior's Honor type duel between you two. You're not only finally being able to put Radahn to rest after him losing his mind to the Scarlet Rot, but you do so in a way befitting of a man of his stature. Killing him by summoning a million phantom to help you just feels wrong when looked at from this perspective and takes away from the fight. I do want to say that I don't think any less of people that do choose to kill him this way. Everyone plays the game differently and there's nothing wrong with that. Just that in my personal experience I'm not a big fan of it for my playthrough. As far as his gameplay goes, he is pretty fantastic. Other than an unfortunately tedious start to the fight, I don't have any issues with anything in his first phase. Both before and after he has magic to his swords, he's a joy to fight. His big sweeping attacks are just the right speed and size to not feel too easy to dodge, yet punishing when you do mess up. He also has a pretty large arsenal of attacks, but they aren't all that different from each other. Something that really helps with making it so his fight never feels stale, yet not making it overly complicated with a lot of moves to memorize. This is then followed up on what I consider to be one of the coolest transitions FromSoft has done. I think the fact that there are several videos with millions of views on YouTube that are just people reacting to it just speaks for itself. After this, Radahn gets several new moves, many of which being magic attacks. This is where I think the fight slightly dips in quality. There isn't anything egregious here, but overall I think it takes away from the fight. There are a couple of moves that I don't think are up to par with the rest of his kit. That being the attack where he puts rocks above his head and his weird dashing attack. Starting off with the former, it's just a weird attack. It's similar to past attacks in the series like homing Soul Mass in Dark Souls 1, but it comes at such an insane delay. Instead of just going off relatively soon after being cast, they linger for what can be minutes before he uses them. And even then, they're a bit of a nightmare to actually dodge, as if you don't create enough distance from Radahn, they come towards you very fast, followed by Radahn himself. And as for the latter, it's also just a weird attack. It doesn't particularly fit the rest of his fight. He just twirls around flying through the air. It honestly looks a bit bizarre. It can also be fairly hard to even see what is going on as he's doing it. A lot of the time he'll fly into the camera, making it impossible to see anything. Other than these minor hiccups, I think Radahn is a pretty fantastic fight. I honestly find it a shame that they nerfed him, as I found him to be one of the more enjoyable fights in Elden Ring pre-nerf. But if a significant portion of the player base was stuck on him, then it is what it is, I suppose. Ludwig is honestly a very similar fight to Radahn, though ironically enough I have more criticisms for Ludwig. Before I get into those, I'll quickly go through the positives. Like I said, Ludwig is very much like Radahn to me, just a solid fight with a great flow to it. There are two main reasons why I decided to place him above Radahn, those being the fact that Ludwig is in Bloodborne, so I just have a natural bias towards the combat. And the fact that Ludwig doesn't have the same problem with summons as Radahn. Ludwig is just a nice clean one-on-one. Now, for my criticism. First being, I think there is a pretty big difference in the quality between Phase 1 and Phase 2. This is a very subjective take, but I'm not a huge fan of the animalistic beast fights, like his phase 1. I don't think they're bad, but I do prefer more standard fights, like what his phase 2 is. I enjoyed when it is a bit slower and methodical, instead of having a giant screaming beast run at me constantly. He's very much the same as Godrick in this regard. Ludwig is also one of the few fights this high up where I actually have a problem with one of his attacks. See, in phase 1, he has an attack where he jumps into the sky and jumps down on you, without really being able to see him. Because of this, you have to mainly rely on muscle memory to dodge it. There are other attacks like this in FromSoft, and I'm not a huge fan of those either. With most of them, you just have to get hit a few times in order to learn the timing, and then you'll be fine. This isn't great, but it doesn't ruin a fight for me. Problem is, this doesn't work with Ludwig. For some reason, they decided this wasn't what they were going to do for his version. This time, they were going to make it random. That being said, I don't actually know if it's literally random, but it does at the very least have several different timings where you can come down, so it honestly doesn't really matter if it is. This makes the attack impossible to reliably dodge, and you kind of have to guess and hope you're lucky. Other than this, I don't really have any more problems with phase 1. Phase 2 is where the fight dramatically improves for me as he gets a sword and becomes very similar to Radahn. In both, you are a lone man fighting against someone much larger than you who's wielding a sword. They both have the same sort of massive swings, being more AoE attacks than anything. They both have the same sort of flow to them, Ludwig being slightly more enjoyable as the combat system is just simply better. Another pretty big plus for Ludwig is that I personally found his fight to be a bit harder. I don't think Radahn is an easy boss, but Bloodborne was overall a much harder game, especially when it came to the DLC that Ludwig is from. To be completely honest, if I were to rate Ludwig equally with his phase 1 and 2, he'd be a fair bit lower on the list. But I think his phase 2 is mainly what the fight was meant to be and what sticks with you even after you beating the fight. Also, if you're getting fed up with my Bloodborne bias, then don't worry, there's only a couple more to go. Starting with phase 1, and we're already running into one of my problems with the fight. On its own, I don't really have any problems with this phase. Most of my problems come from it being coupled with the Nameless King. The King of the Storm is fine on his own, if not a bit annoying to fight. He's a pretty prime example of a fight where you have to spend most of the time just standing around and waiting for the boss to let you hit it. Most of his attacks are based around flying or swaying his head around, which is the only part of his body you really want to hit. Except for a fire-breathing attack and a couple of attacks where the Nameless King directly swings at you, there aren't really all that many openings. The main suggestion for improving this fight is somewhat simple, though they might be a bit controversial. I think they should have removed the Ancient Wyvern altogether and just replaced the fight with one against the King of the Storm. This would make it so that the start of the area actually has a proper fight instead of one of the worst in the entire series, while also make it so they can flesh out the King of the Storm. Another positive with this would be making it so that the Nameless King doesn't have a dud of a first phase, making him more room for fleshing out his own kit. By not having a completely different fight at the start of it, makes it so that the devs don't have to be afraid of making him too complex with the fear of making the fight too hard or too long. The second phase is where I really had trouble with rating. This is what really made me decide how much weight I wanted to place on the first time meeting a boss. Some bosses really just don't hold up that well after having fought them several times and only really truly shine the first time. I think the Nameless King is a perfect example of this. The first time people fight this boss, the consensus is that he's a fairly challenging fight, but still a fun one. Obviously, every boss becomes easier after you manage to beat it at least once, but I think Nameless King suffers a lot more from this than most bosses. After you've beaten this boss at least once, the fight becomes a walk in the park. All of his moves start to feel really slow and easy to react to, making the entire phase a bit of a joke. Now the question was I going to rate it off of my experience with him the first time or my latest time? Eventually, I decided on putting more importance on the first experience with the boss, making so that I would do the same with most bosses. My main reason for this is that I think every boss is the most enjoyable the first time you fight it. Adding to this, I'm not really the type of person that enjoys playing or watching something several times, making so that I would most likely have an unfair bias towards fights such as this one. While I understand that some might disagree and would rather have a criteria for the fight being how it scales with New Game Plus, but I'm just not that type of player. This is also my list, and I want to make it feel more personal by having my own biases play a big part instead of trying to be as objective as possible. I think this makes the video more unique while also being more enjoyable to make. I hope you think so too. And that'll do it for the grade tier. And just like last time, I'll just do this outro like off the cuff unscripted. as I mainly only put it at the end so it doesn't end so abruptly, and it's just to like air some of my thoughts out, I suppose. Like I said earlier in the video, my next video will be my last one in this series, and it'll be my top 10 bosses of FromSoft. It will probably take some time for this one to come out, and I know I say this every time, but this one is actually quite a lot longer. The part I've written for the final boss is like longer than the entire Lackluster tier, I think. So the video will probably be around an hour or so if I had to guess. So I'm looking at like maybe a month will be my goal to get it out. So I hope you're looking forward to that one. So I want to say thank you for everyone who watched the last video. It actually did surprisingly well for me not having uploaded for 10 whole months. So that was nice. I also really enjoy when you guys leave comments and stuff telling me what I'm wrong about or giving more insight into how bosses work on a more technical level. So I really enjoy that and hope I'll see some more of that this video, as I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot of things. I also want to briefly talk about the fact that I don't particularly go in depth into the kits of some of these bosses, which is kind of a shame. Like, I barely talk about the Nameless King, and that is mainly because their kits are so good. As a baseline, they're just really, really good, and I find it hard to find anything in particular to say about them other than like, this attack is good, this attack is good, this attack is good, etc, etc. So I'm mainly focusing on what I think knocks them down, as all these bosses basically start on a 10 as a baseline. But yeah, that is about what I wanted to say here at the end. So thank you guys for watching, thank you for the support so far. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll try to get it out before April, but no promises.